I guess so. First off, like, how many of you guys have heard about Falcor? Okay, decent number of you. I know some of you work with me, so you've already heard a lot of what I'm about to say anyway. But yeah, so Falcor is actually, it's a new framework that's out from Netflix. It's designed around a new concept that's called JSON Graph, which we'll get into in a moment. And it's meant to be a way to simplify the data that's actually being sent to your client. So whether that be a mobile phone, a tablet, a desktop, only requesting the data that you need is the key component to what Falcor is really about. And being able to request multiple attributes from multiple microservices at the same time. So no more like being able to just go to one endpoint, wait, and do everything synchronously. Now through JavaScript promises, you can actually deploy and go out to multiple microservices at the same time, wait for those payloads to come back, and be able to deliver only the information that you need to deliver to your front-end code. So just real quick, a little bit about me. You can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet at DB Slone, and I'm also an engineer at Laurel and Wolf. But kind of going on from there, first we got to have a little bit of a history lesson. If we're going to talk about data, we're going to talk about the way that data is delivered on the web. We've got to go back a little bit, and we got to go talk about SOAP APIs. How many people remember this? It was terrible. We hated it. I mean, look at this. Like, there's so much code and just so much excess about the way that we need to deliver data. Like, nobody wants to do this. It had there are people that will give its valid reasons, and it had a small use case. I hated it. So then we moved on. We got JSON API. That was like this whole new revolutionary world about how we can actually start doing related resources and relationships. And like you can see from this example here, like from SOAP, like everything is simplified a whole lot now. And it's great. You can do things like sparse field sets and a lot of things that JSON API allows you to do, but you're still going to one single server to get all the data. And so over time, just through watching some of the videos from the team over at Netflix and talking about Falcor, they started really looking at this paradigm and really just going, okay, how can we make this better? Like, we're delivering so much extra data that we don't need to deliver. And what if if I wanted to know about an article, and I only wanted, like, and of course I pared this one down, like I just wanted the title, like, it's pretty, there's still so much excess data that you end up getting because of related resources and the way that JSON API works. So now let's talk about the future. So we move into JSON Graph, and the thing that makes JSON Graph so valuable is the fact that you can share, so you can reference different objects throughout the graph that's being delivered back. So for example here with this, like if we look at the bottom here are my to-dos, and I see here that this is a type of reference that has a value, and it says to-dos by ID, and it gives us an integer value here of 44, and the same thing is repeated below as we're looking at an integer value of 54. So now we look back up to our graph here, and we see to-dos by ID, and now we see the actual object graph that's being stored, and it's just JavaScript objects now. Like, that's what we're talking about with Falcor, is just JavaScript objects. We're simplifying everything. We're taking out needing to go relationships and resource ID and drilling down through the graph like so drastically. Now everything is just passed through by references. And so each time that I want to, so imagine, for example, like with my to-dos here, imagine there was another field that was called created at. And I needed to know when the to-do was created at. I can easily make a request that will only bring back the created at, and it will just append it into this object here, making it very simple. So this is just a quick overview. There's a lot of things that are kind of going on in here, but as we start looking at the way that the requests and the responses are made from Falcor, it actually becomes much simpler, and you start really getting to see the power of this. And so this is kind of the client side of things, where we're going to actually build a cache with Falcor. And so like it's just very simple. We say Falcor.model, and then we give it an object structure here. And the first thing that we can give it is a data source. The data source actually isn't required. We can actually do Falcor completely just on the cache and using setters and getters inside of our code and never touch an external server. But in this particular instance, we are going to define a cache. And our cache here, we can see that we have our users. And sorry, this doesn't relate to this previous slide. I didn't have time to make all the data marry up and everything. This was just a quicker code example for me to put together. So we see in our cache, we have our users. We have a user ID of 1. And we see this new syntax here that's kind of interesting. It's $ref. Well, what is $ref? If we go back and we look at this slide, essentially $ref is just a Falcor sugar syntax that actually just lets us do type ref here. And JSON Graph is designed in a way that when it sees an object and it sees a type, whether it be reference or atom or error, it knows what to do. And sorry, I'm throwing a lot of things out there very fast. This is a massive framework. Netflix has made tons of great documentation. Go read it, go watch the videos. The videos are fantastic. Like, there's so much more information you can gain from this. I just really want to give you guys a high-level overview so that you can see and understand what this framework is capable of. Because so many times when it comes to new frameworks, we don't fully, we're not fully enticed to be wanting to go down that route just because, well, we have this massive application. It's going to take so much extra engineering effort to be able to do this. Well, if we can simplify the way that we evolve the future of being able to write our code and receiving the data, then you really start to see the power of this. So going back to the next slide here, so now we're looking at, so this is just our cache. This is the way that Falcor will locally store all of our data. And so it's just very simple JavaScript objects, and that's the beauty of this. It's just dot notation to be able to go and find anything that you want to find. So here I can see that I have a user of 0 who has a name, and I have a user of 1 who has a name. Now imagine if I wanted to, inside of this users by ID here, and we'll do maybe some examples a little bit later of this, but I could also have an attribute in here called friends. That's an array. And that array would actually have a reference to user 1. So now I didn't have to go request user 1 because user 1 is already in my cache. And I know that because I'm just following reference links. And what Falcor would do is when it's, imagine now that there's this imaginary friends list here, and I say user 55. Well, user 55 isn't in my cache. So it's going to go to my data source, and it's going to go and build a query that goes out to my server, and it's going to say, for user 55, give me the name, because that's all that I requested. So now the other piece of this that's really worth understanding is the router inside of Falcor. Because this is where we start now dividing and conquering. And that's kind of where the whole reason of the name from this, is the destroyer of monolith APIs, is we can have multiple microservices. So I can have one that's going to deliver me users, one that's going to deliver me friends, one that's going to deliver me recommendations. There's so many different ways in all of the different companies that I'm sure we're all at, that we can start dividing our object graphs that come back and being able to really utilize smaller servers that are more maintainable code so that we can start really returning massive object graphs back to the client. And so kind of taking a look here at this, we can see the first thing that is inside of the Falcor router is we have a route, and we see projects. And then the syntax starts getting really weird, and we don't see this in JavaScript dot notation. And the way that JSON Graph treats dot notation is it also kind of treats it like a string so that it can do interpolation and understand what you're wanting. So here we see that in the middle, we see integers, indices. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is I can write a request that says, give me projects 5 through 50. and I only want the titles of those projects. So it's, instead of having to write like queries and, to do that in JSON API, it's a single resource. So I would have to make 50 requests to get just the title from 50 records. Well, now I make one request to get the title for 50 records. And so, this is kind of some code that I pared down from what we were using before. But we see here with this, promise all, so I'm able to do simultaneous requests to projects to be able to retrieve that. So our backend is actually consisted of JSON API. So this example is kind of working concurrently with JSON API as well to be able to return the data that we want. But it makes it really simple to just go grab all the data, process it, and bring it back. And so the next thing in here that's really worth noting about this is, so we look at the return value here that's coming back. So now we see another piece of new syntax that we haven't seen before, which is $value. And essentially what $value is doing is it's going to bring back this user here. And so we define, so the same way that our routes up here define a project with an ID and the attribute that I want to bring back, down here I redefine that route, and now I'm actually doing it in an array. So I'm going to say the data that's coming back from Falcor is a project with a project ID that also has a floor plan. And so then now we move on a little bit further down the line, and we see another new piece of sugar, like syntax sugar, and that is $Atom. Well, $Atom is it's another way of kind of the same way that we see the ref here. The atom will be type atom, and what that means is the Falcor model will say this is a literal object that I'm going to store, whether that be a string, whether it be an array, although you're not supposed to store arrays with Falcor. There's, that's kind of the whole point of our routes and just being able to request only the information that we need. But we all know sometimes you got to break spec just to be able to do what you need to do. In this particular example, like I'm returning an array, and just kind of finishing out the promise here. Actually, that code is kind of weird. Oh, that's for my promise all. Sorry, I was just looking back at my code. So that's kind of the basics of the Falcor router and the model itself. So let's actually take a look at that, and I forgot to open this up. Sorry about that. So this is actually a GitHub repo that I created as well, and I can share the link with anybody that wants to take a look at it. And so it's actually it's using Happy as the node engine, and then Falcor is all implemented, and there's a little bit of testing still, kind of working on getting this to where I want it to be. But so let's see. So here is kind of the routes. Actually, that's kind of small. Let me make that bigger. So, the same idea applies here. Like we see our users, and we can define our integers here. And so, the way that request looks is, here. So I say user dot get value, and get value is a way of saying that I'm only requesting for one resource. And I say users, the ID of the user, and then the attribute that I'm requesting. Well, but what if I also wanted to request multiple users? Well, the syntax only changes slightly in the fact that I can just say from 0 to 1. Or I can even come in here, and I'll write this above here so you can see an example of it. I will say user.get. So now I was able to do the same thing that I did here, but I was actually able to use the JavaScript object and just say from this index to this index. And both of these are equal. And so, I mean, that's kind of the basic overview of this and the power that Falcor has. This is a lot of information, and I've skimmed through a lot of things just because there's not a whole lot of time to be able to really go in depth, and I'm still learning it as well as I'm going through this. Yeah, so kind of going back and looking at the client request here. This is my data source, so it's using just a library from HTTP data source, and I can give it a URL of a server, anywhere in the world or localhost. I can even take out my source, and I could say, user dot. I forget the syntax for it right now. I won't do that example. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a very quick overview of just the power that Falcor can actually provide to you as a developer, and also to your users and your client-side code. And recently, like I've been starting to talk more and more about this framework to people that are in a non-technical background as well. And one of the things that I've really found in being able to shorten down a way to make it explainable to them is that Falcor will provide a faster response time for your users by limiting the amount of data that you have to transfer over the wire, and it actually will speed up your development process. And it works well with inside of Redux or Redux React. It also works with Angular. The library it's just a JavaScript SDK, so you can use it with inside of anything that you're working with currently. Yeah, and so that's it. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you, David. So, kind of open for questions if you have anything to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll just go down the line here.
All right, cool. So you mentioned like getting users 0 through 1 and .name.
Mm-hmm.
How does that look if your backend store is like MySQL or whatever? Like how do you translate that request into a SQL query?
Yeah, so I mean the way so if you were going from MySQL and bringing this into Falcor, you would still have kind of an intermediary server or something set up in, or you would even have Postgres or MySQL connector built into your Falcor application.
They provide those.
So through Node, there's adapters to connect to MySQL and Postgres and Redis and different things.
So I believe there's actually, for certain databases, there are overlays.
Yeah.
So like Postgres for Falcor and GraphQL, so you can get the table schema into like some representation. You can start doing user-defined queries.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I was wondering, MongoDB query language has kind of the same function,
I haven't used Mongo, so I'm not as familiar with it.
You can specify the search and what fields you want back, and you can do a lot of things that you can do here.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but this is like this is different, right? This is for like the API. You don't want to necessarily change the entire way that your data is laid out on your entire database management system because you want to have your API be,
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of advantages between the caching and the fetching that happen with Falcor as well. So, you know, as I'm always retrieving things, and then even so, like imagine, like, so I'm primarily familiar with a React application right now. And so as I have multiple components that are all needing data to be filled, Falcor will actually batch as well. So you know, I'll periodically be making a request and I'll grab, you know, the first half of what I need, and then the other components will make it into the second batch and it'll go out and it'll bring back what you need. And I know that's kind of, I mean, a little bit off from what you were talking about with MongoDB. I mean, it's definitely something I'll look into, and just being able to understand like what some of the key differences are between this and what Mongo's doing. Yeah.
How do you handle cache purging? It seems like if you have a super long-lived application we're using Falcor and it's caching stuff locally, then you could end up in a state where some other user has changed a thing, but Falcor is fetching from the local cache.
So that's kind of the other piece of like that I've noticed that Falcor has started, like they've thought about this, and my interpretation of this is probably not as good as Jafar's, but you know, I'm trying to do my best with it. But essentially the way that it works, because of the way that things are being referenced to each other, so if we go back to this, so, and I lost it. I think it might come back now. But anyway, so essentially what happens is through those references, as I do a set value, it will update my local cache, and then in the background, it will do a dispatch out to the server to actually be able to update the database store there as well. So everything stays in sync. Falcor just kind of manages a lot more of that, like kind of behind the scenes.
You can also, I mean, Falcor can figure out what its cache busting strategy is from its service layer. Like, for instance, if you're using HTTP caching, it's like very obvious when to go get the data. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, well,
Okay, so they can do stuff like that.
Did it?
And say, what's the caching strategy of the server?
Oh.
I'll follow that, and then I'll expire when it's okay.
Oh yeah, although you probably do it like, I think the instructions I read about it are all like on a global scope. Like, okay, here's this specific, like, here's my main application API. Here's how it handles things.
Okay.
I couldn't remember reading anything about resource level caching, but I get the feeling that that's like,
Global level.
yeah.
So, and in Falcor, like so as we were seeing on the router, I can actually say that if you made a request that I want you to invalidate other different things that are being stored locally in the cache as well.
Okay.
So from the server, I can dictate locally on the client what's actually invalidated.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, from one of your first examples, obviously, if you want to get a list of all the articles available, you don't, and the API gives you the article, the title of the article, and the entire content of the article, that would be incredibly inefficient. That would be a giant, terrible amount of data that you're getting if you just want a list of titles. It seems like this is kind of doing the opposite, where you're only getting the stuff that you want.
Mm-hmm.
However, it worries me, and I may have misunderstood how it works, but it seems like when you have a bunch of things as microservices, now if I want to get the title and the author and the content, I have to do 3 separate requests for the author and the title and the content. And
So that would suck, yeah. So there's you can through the routing you can group what comes from each microservice. So so
HTTP request.
yeah. So I can say like where did the remote go?
Oh, it's right there. Next to your computer.
No, that one's the clicker. Is this the one for the projector? Did it go back off or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to reset one of the barcode might take about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. Yeah. So the way that it would work, so we would like where we saw like the route for the floor plans. I can actually, instead of just saying floor plans there, I can turn that into an array, and I can say that it's anything that I pass into it, and it's a catch-all. And then the floor plans is only the one that gets called if I specify floor plans. So my graph request itself, I could say project 1 and give me name, give me the user, give me The floor plans give me the photos. Floor plans and photos could come from a separate service, while all the other project information would actually come from one single, like, in our particular case, it would be like a JSON API response that comes back and delivers me all the information about the project. Does that help clarify like your thoughts, or?
I just don't want to be doing, if it's a bunch of microservices, I don't want to be sending a bunch of different requests. I didn't really, honestly, I didn't really understand what you just said.
I mean, if you've got a bunch of microservices though, returning various bits of the data you need, you may have microservice too far, or you may
Well,
want
it sounds like
to
that would-
have a unifying layer in front of them on the server side that does all the fetching from various microservices, so that your client side can literally just make the one HTTP request.
Well, I mean,
Well,
the other thing is
doesn't-
there's nothing really wrong with multiple requests. Like, browser's pretty good at making multiple requests at the same
Well,
time.
But it'll stop at a certain point. It'll be like,
Well,
I
that's
mean,
all
you'll hit
good,
a
I mean,
big performance hit, right? If you're doing a bunch of HTTP requests just for like a couple bits of data, like for the title and the author, if you have to do 2 separate HTTP requests for like, a couple characters, and that's.
Well, okay. you got
Well, I
other
mean, but if
problems.
Pushing it too far.
I think
Well,
there was
what if-
column
what if-
select in his example.
Well, but what if-
Like a SQL select, and you list the columns. I saw that couldn't you specify more than one column, more than one?
Yeah, you can
attribute?
specify multiple
So for a
columns that
single
come from one
relation,
cert.
They're sort of decomposing it. To me, it seems like decomposing into flat relations, and you can choose the columns you want from a given relation. So it seems like you're doing one query per relation.
Right. I just want to know that, I just want to make sure that on how it works, it's just sending one request, and just instead of, if you have it as multiple services,
Right.
it
Yeah.
knows,
So,
ask
like-
all these things at the same time and get me back all the data at the same time,
even
so
sending
that we're not
multiple
doing
queries.
multiple HTTP requests for little
Right.
bits of data.
So
Cool.
it actually is. So there's one request from the client to the server, and then there might be multiple requests server to server. So if you have these servers in close physical proximity, there's actually a fairly low cost to doing the multiple requests, and you aren't actually restricted by some browser restrictions for multiple HTTP
Right,
requests.
it's like behind like VLAN.
I mean, you get into a situation where we start comparing it to like database queries where, yeah, they are technically N+1 queries, but, they're server to servers that are next to each other, and they're pretty fast queries and they're in parallel.
Right.
So there's some, some wasted server time,
But
but
that's-
in terms of
yeah.
user time, it's much less. It is
You're
that
also
single
banking on
server.
the fact that they're all the same sort of data structure, though, because I'm like, I'm going to a MySQL and Mongo and a Cassandra database. You're like, well, the MySQL is obviously going to take the longest because they're complex query.
Right.
So it's a gift away for them to converge, and that just seems like.
So in this example, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, you're fine.
We probably have about like 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So in this example, you are waiting for everything in your Falcor request to complete before the client gets anything back.
Yeah.
But actually, Falcor has a WebSocket adapter. Where
Okay.
You can connect over an open connection and you start receiving that data back as it's available. So in that case, you'd start to get pieces of
Oh,
data
nice.
back as they're ready.
That's
Yeah,
pretty
so
cool.
if you guys have any more like details for that particular discussion, you guys are always welcome to join the Slack channel, and then you guys can connect. It's an awesome place since everyone's here. Any other questions for David?
Yeah. So validation is a question I had. So I know with all these graph JSON APIs, you can specify like what types you're bringing in and all that, what you're expecting back out. But what does it do when I provide, say, there are like required fields on the JSON API or like the JSON graph, or I provide too many or I provide too few? How does that handle that in the situations? Like, is there like a JSON schema validator I can use for what I'm getting back or no?
So I guess as far as the validation, we're talking about between Falcor and the microservice, or between
Yeah.
the client and Falcor?
Between Falcor and the microservice.
So in the promise, like from making the request out to the microservice, you then structure your data, like, you do whatever manipulation you need to do before you do the return. And then, so like you can weed out anything that may come back that you don't need. And then you only send back, and Falcor will even yell at you too, if you like try to send back more fields than was actually
That's what I was
requested
more curious about.
from the client request. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
Cool.
Anyone else?
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.